Hello and welcome to SPEEDIER SME Training, Module 3, Transport. Today we will look at energy efficiency through transport and electric vehicles. The European Union target by 2030 is to have at least 30 million zero-emission cars to be in operation on European roads. There's also other targets like 100 European cities to be climate neutral. There also is high-speed rail traffic double across Europe. Automated mobility will be deployed at large scale and zero-emission marine vessels will be market ready. Transported in the EU in 2018, there was 3.6 billion tons of freight handled at seaports. There's also other statistics like 1 out of 5 of road freight journeys were performed by empty vehicles, and 75.3% of total inland freight transport was by road transport. Here you can see inland freight transport for 2018. This is the split between road, railway and inland waterways. The EU average is in and around 75%, with the next being railway, followed by inland waterways. For countries like Cyprus and Malta, there are no railway or inland waterways to use, so therefore 100% of inland freight is transported via road, followed by Ireland with nearly 99% of all freight being transferred by road. Here you can see on the left graph the amount of freight moved via rail in million tons kilometre, which is a KPI used, which is the amount of kilometres times the weight of the freight that was transported. As you can see, Germany with nearly 120,000 million tons per kilometre or each kilometre, compared to Ireland, which is barely on 1,000. The right graph shows the freight transported via sea. You can see the Netherlands, mainly due to the port at Rotterdam, has the highest. You can also see that Ireland, which is down there at nearly 50 to 55 million tons of freight transported via sea. It should be noted that it is more efficient to transport goods via rail and via waterways compared to road transport. This graph shows the percentage breakdown of passenger transport instead of goods transport. As you can see, the EU average is in around 82% for passenger cars, followed closely, well, not closely should I say, but followed by motor coaches and bus, and then followed closely after that by trains. As you can see, countries like Estonia, there is no trains whatsoever transporting people, with majority driving passenger cars followed by motor coaches. In Ireland, you can see we have a very, very small amount of passengers being transported by trains, with 82% of passengers being transported via passenger cars, with 16% on motor coaches and buses, and 2% via trains and trams. This shows that Ireland needs to either increase the numbers using these public transport modes, like buses and coaches and trains, or to look at switching private cars from diesel and petrol to electric. For a country with so much road freight and being the main method of transporting freight, and with so many cars, the road accident deaths are very low for Ireland, with roughly 29 deaths on our roads per year, which is nearly half the average of the European Union. And seen here on the right, you can see throughout Europe, the main category of persons killed in road accidents are cyclists. In 2018, transport became the second highest carbon emitter in Europe, overtaking industry, as seen here by the grey line. As the second highest carbon emitter, it's important to understand the breakdown of transport modes. As you can see here on the left pie chart, aviation accounts for 13.9%, and maritime, which is seaborne and waterborne transport accounts for 13.4%, with the large majority of transport being from road transport and the main carbon emitter. The pie graph on the right shows the breakdown of road transport into vehicle modes or vehicle types. As seen, the 61% are private cars, followed by heavy duty trucks and buses. These three road vehicles are the main targets for energy efficiency in Europe. So going further into the transport modes, you see here, private cars are the highest emitter of carbon, with 43% of total carbon emissions from transport. This is due to the low amount of passenger car capacity and longer distance journeys done by people within the EU, and the vast majority of people that are driving private cars as well, rather than taking public transport. Heavy goods vehicles and road freight is the second largest, with 27% of total carbon emissions from transport. This is mainly due to it being the main mode of transport for heavy goods and freight. According to the Department of Transport, 75% of all goods are moved by road, with 20% transported by rail and 5% by water. Aviation then is the third largest carbon emitter at 14%. That's of total transport carbon emissions. It's stated that a higher GDP often means a higher aviation greenhouse gas emissions. It's also good there to note that it takes 3 to 4 litres of jet fuel to get one passenger 100 kilometres. Railway transport is the most efficient form of transport, as the total carbon emissions of rail being below 1% of total carbon emissions from transport. When you think of the continent of Europe, there is a lot of transport by rail, yet it is so low on carbon emissions. Modes of transport, the private car. Private car is one of the many reasons why public transport like buses is so slow and inefficient throughout Europe. With more cars comes more traffic jams. Each car only has a capacity of between 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 passengers. And carbon emissions can be seen here for a typical Volkswagen Golf. This is a 2-litre diesel engine, is about 117 grams of CO2 per kilometre. Typical 1.5 petrol VW is about 113 grams of CO2 per kilometre. And a 1.4 hybrid Golf is about 39 grams of CO2 per kilometre. So you can clearly see that hybrid is obviously the most efficient way of driving a private car, apart from electric vehicles, that is. It's also good to note there that diesel is excluding the toxic NOx emissions, the nitrous oxide emissions that are coming off diesel cars, which is becoming a big talking point within cities, that toxic nature of diesel within cities and within such a cramped environment is actually a health and safety disaster. That's one modes of transport for rail, which accounts for less than 1% of total EU carbon emissions. Transport via rail has been around for 200 years, with the first ever rail journey taking place in 1804. Just some figures from Ireland. You can see here the Irish Rail Intercity Rail has a capacity for 190 to 304 passengers. And the tram link, the Luas, has a capacity for 291 to 319 passengers. The average emissions for trains is about 44 grams of CO2 per kilometre, a little bit higher than the hybrid car. Yet when you think about the amount of people that can be on this train for those kilometres, you can clearly see why it is the most efficient mode of transporting people. The Luas, the average emissions for the tram is around 54 grams of CO2 per kilometre. In 2016, there was 183.5 million passenger kilometres. That is the amount of passengers times the amount of kilometres travelled. Modes of transport is the bus, which is 27% Transport via, let's say, double-decker city buses, which have a capacity of 86 to 125 passengers. Long-range coaches have 52 seats. And your average bus is around 822 grams of CO2 per kilometre. Now, it seems like this is the most inefficient way of getting around. And you think the car is better because it's got a lower carbon emissions per kilometre. But when you take into account the amount of people that are on the bus, 52 versus 5, you can clearly see that it is more efficient to transport people via bus. And then the most important, you could say, and the least thought of, is cycling. For small 5K cycle to work instead of driving your private car for an entire year, you can save up to 296 kilograms of carbon, or around €614 a year, and also reduces your risk of diseases. The Bike to Work scheme is a new scheme that helps you obtain a brand new bike and safety equipment worth up to €1,250 for a regular bike, and also 1,500 for an electric bike. It uses the employer's PRSI contributions in order to incentivize companies to let their employees use it. I'm just going through some metrics, performance indicators of transporting people versus goods. Metrics for people are passengers. The performance indicator is passenger per passenger kilometre. So you're just passengers times your kilometres. Carbon indicators are tons of carbon per passenger kilometre. And the most efficient modes of travelling for people is cycling and walking because they don't use any energy. And then for public transport, it's rail. In Ireland statistics, there was 48.6 billion car vehicle kilometres in 2016. Goods, you look at tons of product. The performance indicators are tons kilometres, which is the ton of the weight of goods in tons times the kilometres. The carbon indicators are tons of CO2 times or divided by tons kilometres. The most efficient ways are either by rail or by water. And the amount of goods in 2016 was 11.6 billion tons kilometres. And just for your own people that are interested, calculating energy required for a journey. This can be either for a bike or if you are cycling to work instead of using your car, you want to know how much you are saving. You can use this easy calculation where it's energy required is equal to potential energy, which is mgh, which is mass times the gravity, acceleration due to gravity, 9.81, times the h, which is the altitude that you're going to be going from. You can get all these figures from maps and from Google Maps, that is. And kinetic energy is half mv squared, v being your average speed. A rolling resistance is cmg. C is a rolling friction coefficient that you can find off your car manufacturer or your bike manufacturer. And all this together, you can find out the amount of energy it requires to cycle to one place or drive from one place to another, or get the bus from one place to another. And you can easily see the difference then when you kind of put them all together, that you are saving energy overall when you use public transport and when you think about the amount of people and the mass of people that are moving at the same time. Here's just a quick show of the idea of more people inside of one mode of transport is better than a lot of people using the same kind of transport. Like private car there, for example, with one passenger, it's around 1.13 tons of carbon emissions. Let's say there's 10,000 kilometers a year. That's usually how much people would drive. And as you can see, the grams of carbon per passenger kilometer are slowly going down as you get to trains and Lewis. But the more passengers you have, the higher your passenger kilometer and the less grams of carbon you have per passenger kilometer. Modes of transport followed in by light rail. There is a bus there that says 0.92, but that's a hybrid bus, and which goes against the grain really when you think about electric, diesel, and rail. Heavy rail, on the other hand, is a little bit more inefficient, mainly due to the conditions that they're under. You can see there that the car and the Boeing 727 are near enough to one another. Taxis are very inefficient, and heavy goods vehicles being less efficient. Rail is the most efficient mode of public transport. A small rental car emits 5 times more CO2 than taking the bus, and taking the bus emits 3.5 times more CO2 than taking the tram. And as I said before, walking and biking emit virtually no CO2. Just use up a lot of your energy. Now, the idea that came at the start were the number of empty freight road journeys. As shown in the graph, the EU average of empty road journeys for freight are 20%. In Ireland, the percentage of national road freight journeys that are empty is 25%. Now, fleet management is one solution to Ireland's empty road journeys. So fleet management is the idea of better control of your fleet with things like vehicle tracking, which is real-time vehicle tracking data, your fuel consumption, your mileage, fleet optimization, which is analysis of this gathered data, and using KPIs, you can optimize the trip to and from your supplier or your clients. Workforce management is keeping your drivers, your clients happy and providing accurate estimated time deliveries. Green and safe driving, this is training for your drivers for eco-friendly driving and safe driving. And professional navigation, which is high quality sat-nav systems that can help reduce loss of momentum when braking and ensure fuel savings. Now we'll move on to electric vehicles and figuring out the energy efficiency ways through them. So what is an electric vehicle? Well, there's actually 3 different types of electric vehicles. There's battery electric vehicles, which are completely electrically driven and charged at a charge point. There's plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which can be charged via charge points or onboard petrol fuel generators. Then you have the hybrid electric vehicle, which is mainly petrol driven, but the petrol charges the battery, and the battery is only really used in traffic for those stop-start situations you have, and isn't very efficient over long distances due to the heavy weight of the battery. Here's just a quick overview of the different types and a good analogy for each of them. You can see the battery electric vehicle on the right, mainly made up of battery. The plug-in hybrid, which you can see the gas tank is smaller than the battery, and then the hybrid with the gas tank being bigger than the battery, and the weight of that battery weighing down the car overall. So here's a table explaining in depth the pros and cons of electric vehicles. I know it looks like a lot, but if you think about it, the top section is what we just discussed, which is the electric motor for the battery, and the conventional meter powered by an internal combustion engine. Advantages of a battery electric vehicle are higher efficiency. You can charge it from home or your workplace. There's no noise of them, and there's few automated parts, so maintenance is virtually zero. The disadvantage is this idea of range anxiety. Range anxiety is you don't believe that your car is going to make it to there without having to stop for charging. Long time to recharge, that is slowly but surely being reduced over time to hours at this stage, or 20 minutes for some. There's fewer recharging stations. That's a big one here in Ireland, where the infrastructure isn't really there yet, but it's on the mend, as you could say. And then battery management, where temperatures that if they go up to 45 to 50 degrees, they could look at degradation. And hybrid, there you can see there's higher efficiencies. This is only due to inside a traffic situation where the stop starts happening a lot. There's a lot of refueling stations, so there's no range anxiety there. The only issue is there's tailpipe emissions. You're still dependent on oil. The engine noises and a lot more complex than your conventional vehicle. It's also another one to say that they are less efficient at longer journeys due to the extra weight of the battery and the battery systems. And just to give some breakdown of cost and range and carbon emissions of each, a battery electric vehicle has a range of about 250 to 450. The 450 is the Ford Kuna, which is one of the newest models that have come out by Ford, and it's been test driven Dublin to Galway for €4 overnight charging. Direct emissions are zero. Indirect emissions are about 23 grams per kilometre due to the electrical grid carbon emissions. It is the most efficient use of energy, and less moving parts means less wear and tear. And disadvantage is that the home chargers are slow unless you get in a new system or a fast charging system, which means more money on top of things, but it means less hassle, I suppose, for you in the long run. The charging infrastructure is poor in Ireland, but again, that is being looked at, and it is on the targets for Ireland to have a good infrastructure by 2030. Range anxiety, as said there, 450 kilometres should be enough to get you pretty much anywhere in Ireland, with maybe one stop. Plug-in hybrids, 43 kilometres to 87 kilometres on the electric, and on top of that, it depends on how big your fuel tank is. It ranges for different models, but 43 to 87 kilometres on the electric charge, that's pretty good. You're looking at a cost of 25 to 99,000. Now 99,000 is top of the range. Carbon emissions, 28 grams of carbon to around 74 for heavy ones. It's more efficient city driving than conventional car, and charging makes plug-in hybrids more efficient. And also you have that extra safety net where if you do run out of battery charge, you can drive with petrol. And then the hybrid electric vehicle, cheaper overall in cost, range is about 4.7 litres per 100 kilometres. That's city driving now. It goes up. It's less efficient than when you're driving long distance. And carbon emissions are about 112 grams per carbon, which isn't all that great really. That's tough. That's probably the heaviest ones you can get. You can get them down to 49 grams per kilometer. But again, the advantages of it, which is the infrastructure is in place. It's a transitional technology, so you don't have to go straight into battery electric. And limited electric driving range is the only disadvantage really, and well, heavier than a conventional car. I hope this module was helpful and insightful. For more videos, please see Module 1, where we looked at climate and energy management basics, and Module 2, where we looked into the ring fencing mechanism for funding energy conservation measures, behavioral change, and the SPEEDIER app.